In the latter half of the 17th century, the colony of Virginia, England's prized possession in the New World, was a society simmering with profound tensions, a pressure cooker on the verge of explosion. Founded in 1607 at Jamestown, the colony had evolved from a struggling outpost into a tobacco-based aristocracy. But this very success had created deep, festering inequalities. The colony was starkly divided between a small, powerful elite and a large, discontented population of poorer whites and enslaved Africans, all operating within an economic system that seemed designed to crush the many for the benefit of the few. The primary source of wealth was tobacco, but this brown gold was also the source of the colony's misery. The British government's Navigation Acts, a series of laws passed starting in 1660, mandated that all colonial goods could only be shipped on English vessels and sold exclusively to English markets. This created a mercantilist stranglehold, allowing English merchants to dictate ruinously low prices for tobacco while charging exorbitant rates for manufactured goods imported from Britain. The result was a catastrophic debt cycle for nearly all planters, large and small. As one historian noted, the price of tobacco plummeted from 3 pence per pound to a mere halfpenny, pushing thousands of planters to the brink of financial ruin. To make matters worse, a series of natural and man-made disasters battered the colony. A devastating hurricane in 1667 destroyed homes and crops, followed by a brutal episodic between 1672 and 1673 that wiped out half of the colony's cattle. The colony's governor, Sir William Berkeley, responded not with relief, but with higher taxes to fund his own pet projects and a corrupt circle of cronies. This economic despair created a stark social schism. Virginia was ruled by a tight-knit oligarchy of wealthy planters, the grandees, who dominated the governor's council and the House of Burgesses. Governor Berkeley himself was the epitome of this elite. A veteran of the English Civil War and a favorite of King Charles II, he had ruled Virginia as his personal fiefdom for decades, with the same House of Burgesses sitting continuously since 1661, a testament to his stifling control. In 1670, he further cemented his power by signing a law that stripped voting rights from any man who did not own land, disenfranchising a growing and restless class of landless freemen. This created a powerful class of have-nots, former indentured servants who had completed their contracts but found no land available for them, sinking into poverty and bitterness on the frontier. It was on this restive frontier that the final, volatile ingredient was added, the Indian question. As poorer settlers pushed westward, seeking land to escape their debt and poverty, they inevitably encroached upon territories reserved for Native American tribes by treaty. Tensions flared into violence in the summer of 1675, when a dispute over stolen livestock led to a series of raids and brutal counter-raids between settlers and the Dogue and Susquehannock peoples. The situation escalated when a combined militia from Virginia and Maryland besieged a Susquehannock fort, and in a catastrophic breach of faith, lured 5 of the tribe's chiefs out to negotiate under a flag of truce and then executed them. The Susquehannock responded with a declaration of war, launching devastating raids that killed dozens of settlers along the frontier. The Tommen settlers living in terror demanded that Governor Berkeley authorize a full-scale war of extermination to clear the land of all native peoples. But Berkeley refused. He favored a defensive strategy of building forts, a plan that would be funded by yet another tax and, more importantly, would protect his own highly profitable monopoly on the fur trade with the very tribes the frontiersmen wanted to destroy. The governor's inaction was seen by the desperate settlers not as strategy, but as a profound betrayal. The tinder was piled high, the colony was riven by class resentment, economic despair, and frontier panic. All it needed was a spark. That spark would come in the form of a young, charismatic, and ambitious aristocrat who knew how to channel the rage of the masses. The colony is a powder keg of class resentment, economic despair, and frontier terror. The ruling elite, led by Governor Berkeley, is deaf to the cries of the people. But a leader is about to emerge from an unexpected quarter, a man who will harness this rage and turn it into a firestorm that threatens to consume the very foundations of English America. To follow the rise of Nathaniel Bacon and the explosion of his rebellion, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a moment of the chilling revelation. Into this volatile environment stepped a man who seemed, on the surface, the most unlikely champion of the common folk. Nathaniel Bacon was not a downtrodden farmer or a disgruntled former servant. He was, in fact, a member of the very elite that ruled Virginia. Born in England on January 2, 1647, into a wealthy and well-connected family, Bacon was a gentleman through and through. He received a superb education at Cambridge University and toured Europe, being prepared for a life of privilege and comfort. His arrival in Virginia in 1674 was itself the result of a scandal. He had married a daughter of a duke against her father's wishes, and the newlyweds were packed off to the colonies to avoid further embarrassment and to allow Bacon's father to secure his son's future. With his high-born connections, Bacon was quickly welcomed into the inner circles of Virginia society. He was a cousin by marriage to Governor Berkeley's own wife, and the governor, perhaps seeking to mentor his young relative, helped him secure a lucrative plantation on the volatile frontier at Curl's Neck. For a time, it seemed Bacon was destined to become just another member of Berkeley's favored circle. But living on the frontier changed him. He witnessed firsthand the terror of Indian raids and shared the frustrations of his neighbors with the distant, unresponsive government in Jamestown. He saw the poverty and heard the grievances of the men whom the governor ignored. Bacon, ambitious and possessing a fiery temperament, found a cause. When Indian attacks intensified in the summer of 1676 and Berkeley still refused to grant commissions for a widespread counteroffensive, the frontier settlers decided to act on their own. They needed a leader with military skill, social standing, and the courage to defy the governor. They found all three in Nathaniel Bacon. According to one account, Bacon arrived at a gathering of these angry settlers with a large quantity of brandy. After it was distributed, he was elected their general. Despite having no official commission, Bacon took command of this volunteer militia and led them on a campaign against the Occaneechi tribe. In a display of ruthless brutality that would characterize his methods, Bacon first convinced the Occaneechi warriors to attack the Susquehannock, their traditional enemies. When the warriors departed, Bacon and his men fell upon the undefended Occaneechi village, slaughtering most of the men, women, and children who remained. He returned from this unauthorized expedition a hero to the common people, but a notorious outlaw in the eyes of Governor Berkeley. Furious at this insubordination, Berkeley declared Bacon a rebel and had him arrested. Yet the governor was in a difficult position. Bacon's popularity was soaring, and the economic discontent was universal. Forcing a confrontation risked a wider uprising. In a theatrical scene of reconciliation, Berkeley brought Bacon before the council, pardoned him, and even restored him to his seat on the council. It was a hollow peace. Berkeley believed he had tamed the young hothead, but Bacon had seen the power he could wield. The moment he was free, he fled Jamestown and returned to the frontier, where he began raising a new, larger army. He was no longer just seeking a commission to fight Indians. He was now articulating a broader political vision, tapping into the deep well of popular anger against Berkeley's corrupt and oppressive rule. Bacon had undergone a remarkable transformation. From a privileged insider, he had become the voice of the voiceless. His rebellion was no longer just a border conflict. It was morphing into a class war and a popular uprising against tyranny. He issued a manifesto defending his actions and began to frame his struggle not just as a personal feud with Berkeley, but as a righteous crusade for the commonality and the welfare of the people against a corrupt and unaccountable government. The stage was set for a direct and violent confrontation between the rebel general and the royal governor, a conflict that would decide who truly ruled Virginia. Nathaniel Bacon has been unleashed, and his army of frontiersmen, servants, and slaves is on the march. But Governor Berkeley is not yet ready to surrender his power. The political struggle is about to erupt into open warfare, with the very capital of the colony, Jamestown, caught in the middle. To witness the dramatic siege and the shocking Bacon's laws that would temporarily transform Virginia, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
The spring and summer of 1676 saw Bacon's rebellion escalate from a regional dispute into a full-scale revolution that temporarily overthrew the colonial government. After his escape from Jamestown, Bacon rallied his forces, which now swelled to include not only frontier planters, but also indentured servants and enslaved Africans, a multiracial army of the dispossessed that struck terror into the hearts of the Virginia elite. This coalition was Bacon's greatest strength, and for the ruling class, their most terrifying nightmare realized. The sight of armed black and white men fighting side by side for a common cause would haunt the planters for generations and directly influence the future hardening of racial slavery in America. In June, Bacon marched this formidable force on Jamestown. He found the capital weakly defended. The garrison's sympathies lay more with the rebels than with the governor. Faced with this show of strength, Berkeley and the Burgesses had no choice but to capitulate, at least temporarily. They granted Bacon the official commission he sought to fight the Indians and, more significantly, agreed to new elections for the House of Burgesses, the first in 15 years, which resulted in a legislature dominated by Bacon's supporters. This new Bacon's Assembly passed a series of radical reforms known as Bacon's Laws. These laws were a revolutionary package designed to dismantle Berkeley's corrupt system. They restored voting rights to landless freemen, reformed the tax system to be more equitable, and mandated frequent rotations of local officials to prevent the consolidation of power. For a few brief months, the rebellion had achieved a stunning political victory, transforming Virginia's government into a more democratic institution. However, Bacon's triumph was short-lived. As soon as he left Jamestown to lead another campaign against the Indians, Berkeley voided his commission and again declared him a traitor. The old governor fled across the Chesapeake Bay to the eastern shore to gather loyalist forces. This was the final break. Bacon realized that mere political reform was impossible as long as Berkeley and his clique held any power. The conflict was now a civil war. It was at this critical juncture, on July 30th, 1676, that Bacon issued his defining document, the Declaration of the People of Virginia. This powerful manifesto laid out the rebels' grievances in stark terms, accusing Berkeley of numerous high crimes and misdemeanors. It charged that he had raised great unjust taxes upon the commonty, advanced his favorites to high public office, monopolized the lucrative beaver trade for his own profit, and, most damningly in the eyes of the frontiersmen, been betraying his trust to the Cabinet Council in London and not assisting the colony against the barbarous Indians. The Declaration was a masterstroke of propaganda. It transformed Bacon's personal ambition and the specific issue of Indian policy into a universal struggle against tyranny. It gave a voice to the accumulated grievances of the poor, the indebted, and the disenfranchised, framing their fight as a righteous one, for the very soul of the colony. With this document as his justification, Bacon turned his army back toward Jamestown. He found the capital once again under Berkeley's control. What followed was one of the most dramatic episodes in early American history. In September, Bacon laid siege to the town. Berkeley, hoping to wait for reinforcements from England, had fortified the settlement. But Bacon's force was larger and more determined. In a bold and shocking tactical move, Bacon realized that he could not hold the town indefinitely, especially with British naval power on the horizon. To prevent it from ever again serving as a bastion for Berkeley's power, he made a fateful decision. On September 19, 1676, he ordered Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement in America, to be burned to the ground. His men put the torch to the church, the state house, the taverns, and the homes. The very heart of English civilization in the New World was reduced to smoldering ashes by a rebel that once had been one of its most promising sons. The act was a pure, calculated iconoclasm, a symbol of the rebellion's utter rejection of the old order. Jamestown is in flames, a symbol of the old order consumed by the fires of rebellion. Bacon stands triumphant, but his victory is built on shaky ground. The British Crown is sending warships and soldiers, and within Bacon's own camp, a sudden and unexpected event is about to change everything. The rebellion's days are numbered. To discover the dramatic collapse of Bacon's uprising and its brutal, bloody aftermath, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
The burning of Jamestown was the apex of Bacon's rebellion, but it was also the beginning of its end. Though he was now the de facto ruler of mainland Virginia, Nathaniel Bacon faced a precarious situation. Governor Berkeley was still at large, regrouping his loyalist forces on the eastern shore with the help of armed English merchant ships. More ominously, King Charles II had been informed of the insurrection and had dispatched several warships and over 1,000 professional soldiers, the Redcoats, across the Atlantic to restore royal authority. Bacon's army, though passionate and numerous, was no match for the disciplined might of the British Empire. As the military pressure mounted, fate delivered the rebellion its cruelest blow. In the swampy environs of the Virginia frontier, Nathaniel Bacon contracted a severe case of dysentery, known then as the Bloody Flux. Weakened by the harsh campaign and the immense stress of leadership, his body quickly succumbed. On October 26, 1676, the man who had held the fate of a colony in his hands died in a cabin in Gloucester County, his body reportedly so ravaged by lice that it was difficult to handle. The news of his death was a catastrophic blow to the rebel cause. Bacon had been the charismatic center of the uprising, the one figure capable of uniting the disparate factions of frontiersmen, servants, and slaves. Without his leadership, the coalition began to disintegrate almost immediately. His successor, John Ingram, lacked Bacon's authority and strategic cunning, and the rebel forces fragmented into disorganized bands. Seeing his opportunity, Governor Berkeley launched a ferocious counteroffensive. He returned from the eastern shore with his loyalists and the English naval captains, and with the arrival of the royal troops, he began a campaign of ruthless repression that would become known as the hangings. Dozens of Bacon's former followers were captured, given swift, sham trials, and executed by hanging. The reprisals were so widespread and vengeful that they even drew criticism from England. According to a famous anecdote, when King Charles II was informed of the number of men Berkeley had sent to the gallows, he wryly remarked, "That old fool has hanged more men in that naked country than I did for the murder of my father." The king, recognizing that Berkeley's bloody vengeance was destabilizing the colony further, recalled the governor to England. Broken and disgraced, Berkeley sailed for home, but he died in 1677 before he could present his case to the king. A bitter end to his long and once distinguished career. By the beginning of 1677, the rebellion was effectively over.
The last pockets of resistance were crushed by the royal troops, and the Bacon's laws were swiftly repealed. The old ruling elite, though shaken, had been restored to power, now under the direct supervision of the crown. The rebellion had failed in its immediate objectives. It had not resulted in the permanent expulsion of Native Americans from Virginia, nor had it established a more democratic government. In the short term, it appeared to be a catastrophic failure, a bloody interlude that ended with the ringleader dead and his followers slaughtered. But the rebellion's true impact was not in what it achieved, but in the profound fear it instilled in the hearts of the Virginia aristocracy. The sight of a united army of black and white laborers, armed and demanding their rights, had been a transformative and terrifying experience for the colonial upper class. It revealed the inherent danger of a divided society where poor whites and enslaved blacks might find common cause against their oppressors. This fear would shape the future of the colony, and indeed all of British America, for centuries to come. The rebellion has been crushed, its leaders are dead, and the old order has been restored. But the ruling elite has learned a terrifying lesson from the multiracial army of the dispossessed. In the rebellion's aftermath, they will forge a new social order designed to ensure that such an alliance can never happen again. To understand how Bacon's rebellion paved the way for the codification of racial slavery, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
In the smoky aftermath of Bacon's rebellion, the ruling planters of Virginia faced an existential question. How could they prevent another such uprising? The rebellion had demonstrated that the primary threat to their power and property was not a foreign invasion or an Indian attack, but the volatile combination of a large impoverished white underclass and a growing population of enslaved Africans. The solution they engineered was as brutal as it was brilliant. They would systematically divide the two groups and create a new social order based on race, granting poor whites a psychological stake in the system of oppression while simultaneously stripping enslaved blacks of all rights and humanity. Before the rebellion, the legal status of both black slaves and white indentured servants was often fluid and ambiguous. Some Africans who arrived in the colonies were treated as indentured servants and could earn their freedom after a set period. There were free black property owners in Virginia, and social interaction between the lower classes, regardless of race, was common. The rebellion shattered this fluidity. The colonial elite realized that the solidarity between a white indentured servant and a black slave was a direct threat to their power. To prevent a repeat of 1676, they began to enact a series of laws that deliberately and permanently separated the races and hardened the institution of slavery. This legal transformation culminated in the Virginia Slave Codes of 1705. This comprehensive set of laws codified racial slavery into the very foundation of colonial society. It explicitly stated that all imported non-Christian servants were to be slaves for life, a definition that was soon applied to all Africans, regardless of their faith. The codes declared that slaves were property to be governed by their master's will, not human beings with any inherent rights. They made it illegal for slaves to own weapons, assemble in groups, or leave their plantation without a pass. Most insidiously, the laws created a stark racial hierarchy. They offered new privileges and rights to poor whites, including the right to own property and the restoration of their voting rights in some cases, while simultaneously stripping all blacks, free and enslaved, of these same rights. Interracial marriage was banned. The law now encouraged any white person, no matter how poor, to police the black population, creating a system where the lowest white farmer felt racially superior to even the wealthiest free black person. This legal revolution had several profound effects. First, it successfully drove a wedge between black and white laborers. By giving poor whites a racial bribe, a sense of superiority, and a small stake in the social order, the planters ensured that economic grievances would no longer easily translate into a cross-racial class alliance.
A poor white farmer might still be poor, but he was white, and that now legally meant he was better than a black slave. Second, it transformed slavery from a temporary condition of servitude into a permanent, hereditary, and brutal state based solely on skin color. A child born to an enslaved mother was now a slave for life, creating a self-perpetuating system of exploitation. This provided the plantation economy with a stable, controllable, and endlessly renewable labor force, making the large-scale plantation system economically viable. The legacy of this decision is one of the most tragic and enduring in American history. Bacon's rebellion, a multi-class, multiracial uprising against tyranny, directly led to the creation of a more rigid and brutal racial caste system. The rebellion's failure became the catalyst for the institutionalization of racism as a tool of social control. The planters had learned that by dividing people by race, they could rule them all. The system of white supremacy they built in the wake of the rebellion would not only define the colonial South, but would poison American society for centuries, creating divisions and injustices whose echoes are still felt today. The flames of Jamestown had been extinguished, but in their place, the planters had lit the long, slow-burning fuse of racial conflict. The ruling elite has cemented their power by inventing a new racial hierarchy. But the story of Bacon's rebellion is not just one of division, it is also a story of a lost possibility, a fleeting moment when a different America might have been born. The final chapter explores the rebellion's complex legacy as both a failed revolution and a dark turning point in the history of race and class in America. To uncover the full, haunting meaning of this pivotal event, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the final installment.
Bacon's rebellion has long faded from the popular memory of the United States, overshadowed by the American Revolution that would occur exactly 100 years later. Yet, to dismiss it as a mere historical footnote is to misunderstand a pivotal moment that prefigured the conflicts and contradictions at the very heart of the American experiment. The rebellion's legacy is a complex and paradoxical one. It was both a precursor to the revolutionary spirit of 1776 and the direct cause of the institutionalized slavery that would plague the nation for centuries. It stands as a haunting what if in American history, a glimpse of a different kind of coalition that was violently suppressed and deliberately forgotten. Many of the themes that would define the American Revolution were first played out on the smaller stage of Virginia in 1676. The rebels used the language of liberty, rights, and opposition to tyranny. Their Declaration of the People echoed the grievances that would later be enshrined in the Declaration of Independence: unfair taxation, unresponsive government, and a ruler who placed his own interests above those of the people. The rebellion demonstrated that colonists were willing to take up arms against a royal governor they perceived as corrupt, establishing a powerful tradition of resistance to authority. Thomas Jefferson and other founders, looking back, would see in Bacon's struggle a spark of the pure patriotism that would fuel their own fight for independence. In this sense, Bacon's rebellion was a vital dress rehearsal for the larger drama to come, proving that the spirit of rebellion was alive in the colonies long before the Stamp Act or the Boston Tea Party. However, the rebellion's other, more immediate legacy was the brutal system of racialized slavery that defined the South. The planters' solution to the threat of class unity was so effective that it created a lasting foundation for their power. The racial divisions codified after 1676 ensured that the primary conflict in Southern society would be between black and white, rather than between rich and poor.
This system successfully prevented another large-scale biracial uprising for generations, but at a catastrophic moral and human cost. The rebellion thus represents a critical fork in the road, where America chose a path of racial division over one of potential class solidarity. It marks the moment when the colonies began to move decisively away from a system of temporary, non-racial servitude and toward the permanent, hereditary slavery that would become the nation's original sin. The story of Bacon's rebellion also serves as a powerful reminder of the forces that shape historical memory. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the rebellion was often romanticized. For some, Bacon was a heroic Democrat, a forerunner of Washington and Jefferson, fighting against tyranny. For others, particularly some leftist historians, it was a glorious, if failed, example of a class-based, biracial struggle for liberation. These interpretations often gloss over the darker aspects of the rebellion, particularly Bacon's genocidal rhetoric and his ruthless massacres of Native Americans, which he used as a rallying cry to unite the discontented colonists. The full, messy truth is that the rebellion contained all these elements at once: a protest against tyranny, a bloody racial war on the frontier, and a class uprising that was ultimately betrayed by the invention of modern racism. Today, the ghost of Bacon's rebellion still lingers. It is a story about the power of economic resentment, the fragility of social order, and the devastating effectiveness of racism as a political tool. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable fact that the freedom sought by some was often built upon the enslavement of others. The burning of Jamestown was not just the destruction of a town, it was a symbol of the old order being consumed by its own contradictions. And while that old order was restored, it was forever changed, forced to build a new, more resilient, and more brutal system of control. The rebellion teaches us that the alliances we fail to form can be as historically significant as the ones we do, and that the roads not taken continue to haunt the path we ultimately walk. The story of Bacon's rebellion is a journey into the dark, forgotten heart of America's colonial past. It is a tale of fire, freedom, and a fear so profound that it forged a new and terrible social order. It challenges our simple narratives of liberty and reminds us that the seeds of both revolution and racism were sown in the same fertile, bloody ground. If you are drawn to the deepest and most unsettling mysteries of history, to the stories that demand to be remembered, then your search for the truth continues with us. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We are always exploring the darkest corners of history and the human experience.